For the people of Afrin, North Syria, the earthquake of February 6 is a tragedy upon a tragedy. Like many times before, they were left to fend for themselves with little or no help. Which tracks are available to attain justice for the people of North Syria? And how should the Netherlands and other European countries respond? That's what we're going to discuss today, Afrin trapped between empires. I'll do this with speakers from the Netherlands, Germany and France, so we are in a very international company. But before we will jump into the conversation, we'll listen to music from Sipan Mirkan. He's a Kurdish singer-songwriter and saz player from the region of Afrin, Syria, and he will play saz. So let's listen to him. Thank you very much. We'll listen to you again later in the program. I want to introduce our first guest. It's Peshmerga Morat, human rights activist, musician, and a master's student in data science at the University of Twente. His family is from Afrin, and he fled Syria in 2012 due to his activities against the Assad regime. And Peshmerga will give his take on the situation in Afrin, in North Syria, and how he thinks history shaped the conditions for the current situation. And I think very few people can tell us more about Afrin than Peshmerga, so give him a warm applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be among you, but unhappy to be talking about this. I would like to start with Slava Ukraini, Biji Kurdistan. On the 24th of February 2022, Russia launched an illegal invasion of Ukraine. Russia said Russia's neighbor needed to be demilitarized and denazified, a blatant lie, a pretext where Russia hides its true intentions behind. And here, I'm intentionally using the term Russia instead of saying Putin, because the invasion of Ukraine is not an accidental war. Or using the same words as Russia, a special military operation. It is unfortunately a continuation of a long history of hostilities, hatred, and racism. It is Russia that considers Ukrainian people inferior. A quick search on the internet, you will get to know how many Russian-speaking people call the Ukrainians chochols. It was Russia who caused the Great Famine in the 30s, the Holodomor. It was Russia who occupied and annexed the Crimean Peninsula. And it is again Russia who is still bombing, burning, and destroying the critical infrastructure of Ukraine. On the 20th of January 2018, Turkey and anti-Assad rebels, Turkey's proxies, call them what you want, launched the illegal olive branch operation to invade the Kurdish region of Afrin in northwest Syria. Turkey said, "We aim to give Afrin back to its rightful owners, and we will save the people of Afrin from the terrorists." Again, a blatant lie, where a pretext where Turkey hides its true intentions behind, which are occupation and destruction. This is Turkey, red, and this is Syria, and the green dot is Afrin. Just remember this, the green dot is Afrin. So it was not only actually the AKP party or Erdogan. The ultra-nationalist Turkish party, leader of Turkish party, Bahjali said, "Let Afrin be destroyed and the terrorists there be burned." Even the CHP deputy chair said, "Our glorious army has taken an important action in Afrin. We give our full support to this operation." So it is not only a problem that's caused by Erdogan, it is a bigger and deep-rooted problem in Turkish politics. And to make it even worse, the Syrian Islamic Council, which is based in Turkey, issued back then a fatwa where they declared the fighting against the YPG and the SDF, which are mainly Kurdish, in Afrin and North Syria are actually considered true jihad. A fatwa that reminded millions of Kurds around the world by such fatwas issued by the Islamic Republic of Iran or by Saddam Hussein, or recently the fatwa issued by ISIS in 2014, where they made it a true jihad to kill thousands of Yazidis and enslave their women and girls. When the Turkish army and its proxies from the Syrian opposition invaded Afrin, they justified their action, their operation, and said it is a security threat. Afrin is a security threat. So this is Turkey. Turkey is 783,000 square kilometers. And this is Afrin. And Afrin, size of Afrin is 3,850 kilometers, which is approximately 0.491 size of Turkey. So it was a security threat for Turkey. The region of Afrin. The region of Afrin is in the northwest of Syria and has been settled by Kurdish people since at least the Middle Ages and possibly since the pre-Christian times. Historically, it was called Ciaye Kurmenj, which is in Kurdish the mountains of the Kurds, or in Ottoman archives, Kurdagh, which also means the mountains of Kurds. And so this actually means that the region Afrin is homogeneous Kurdish region. And the region Afrin has 7 sub-districts. We read them here: Mobato, Afrin, Jindrese, Sharan, Bulbul, and Rajo. So Afrin formed regions that was ethnically and linguistically Kurdish. It had some small minorities like Armenian and Arab minorities, but they came later to the region. And estimates of the people of Afrin before the invasion of Afrin was max 500,000 peoples. Add to them 200,000 peoples of internally displaced people from around Syria, because Afrin was a safe space until 2018. I think, yeah. So Afrin is famous for its mountainous, rocky nature and green nature, with more than 10 million trees, olive trees and other type of fruits. And the region of Afrin hosts ancient pre-Christian monuments, such as we see here the Temple of Andara, which is actually bombed to turned into rubble in 2018, and I will show you more about this. So the Temple of Andara is an Iron Age Syrio-Hittite temple, dates back to 1300 before BC. This is another picture of Andara temple, and Andara temple is noted for its similarities to the Solomon's temple, actually. And this is the giant sculpture, Lion of Andara, which is discovered in 1956. Not only Andara, Afrin has also other archaeological sites like Syros, or in Greek, Chiros, which is actually founded by Seleucus Nicator, one of the Alexander the Great's generals. And this is turned to a mosque, by the way, now. And this is the amphitheater of the Syros archaeological site. So that's Afrin in short. But if you want to actually know about Afrin more, it is good actually to go back in history. And I will limit this to 100 years. Afrin region, in 100 years, we have from Ottoman Empire, the Kingdom of Syria, French mandate, multiple Syrian governments, Assad as a Ba'ath party, and the Kurds, and finally Turkey and the rebels. And those agreements and treaties, I have put them here because they are very important to understand the region. The Sykes-Picot Agreement actually was an agreement signed between two great powers back then, France and Britain. They decided, okay, this belongs to you and this belongs to me. And then we had the Treaty of Sèvres, which was signed between the Ottoman Empire, the falling Ottoman Empire, and other the allies. And the Treaty of Lausanne, which is actually the most important one. It is exactly 100 years ago. And it is the establishment of the Turkish state with its current borders. And it is also the year that the international powers have abandoned the Kurds and the Armenians. I won't be talking about the Ottoman Empire because it would make it very long. I will jump into the French mandate. It's going too fast. Okay. So very important thing when we talk about Afrin and the Kurds in Syria is their existence, their language, their identity. And despite being Syria was put under the French mandate, the Kurds were actually, I wouldn't say enjoyed. It was more, they could be themselves. For example, we see here an identity card for a woman from the region of Afrin, from Kimore, and she is Yazidi. And you see in Arabic, it is written Badriya, Yazidiya, Suriya, Kurdiya. The name Badriya, Yazidi, Syrian, and Kurdish. A thing which was unimaginable after France left Syria, actually, and al-Ba'ath party or al-Assad family came to power. And we see also here al-Maskan, Kurdag, Kimar. So Kurdag, I've already mentioned, like in Ottoman and Turkish is the mountain of Kurds. And then we have the reign of Assad families, which lasted from the 60s up until 2012. And here again, I'm specifically talking about Afrin. So it is only, I'm talking about Afrin only, not the whole region of northern Syria. And this period is characterized by the followings. Kurdish language was prohibited. Kurdish villages' names, our village where I'm from, was actually Kani Gaurke, which means clear spring of heldere waterbron in Dutch, but it was given an Arabic name. Though their existence was denied. Denial of the religion, for example, the Yazidis were not allowed actually in the public administration of Syria to be called Yazidis. They were actually recognized as Muslims. We go to the next period, which is a period where the Kurds actually gained power in the region of Afrin and they ruled themselves. And this period is characterized by the following, that Kurdish was the official language. Kurdish villages were reused again. The Yazidi religion was recognized as a religion, and the people could live their religion and could be also called themselves Yazidis and also officially registered. And we see here two pictures. First one is the cultural center for Alawis, because Afrin, not only Sunni Kurds are there, you have Alawis, you have Yazidis, and you have a small group of Christians. Before 2018, I'm talking. So we see here two pictures. So the مركز العلويين في ناحية موباتو نافندا Chanda Alawiyan, and then the cultural center for Yazidis in Rojava. And this center was demolished after the Turkish occupation, and Kuwaiti-funded NGO built a school upon this cultural center. So it was a time period where actually Kurds enjoyed the rights to be themselves, to call themselves Kurds. But this period is also characterized by very sad, tragic event. Afrin is an enclave in the northwest of Syria, and from 2018 until 2016, actually the region was besieged. This is a text graffiti on a mosque, wall of a mosque outside Afrin. And here you read in Arabic, كل من يدخل مواد إلى عفرين مهدور الدم والمال. Actually, people who try to smuggle food to Afrin will be threaten his life and blood, so he will be killed. So that region was not only that period was not only actually a period where Kurds could be themselves, but also were besieged. So the invasion of Afrin was not an accidental war. It was already actually boiling down. It was already, a lot of things are happening. I must hurry up. The last period is the occupation of Afrin. Literally, I would need like 1,000 hours to talk about this, but I would make it very, very, very brief. So the region of Afrin was the Turkish military and the Syrian rebels started the operation in January 2018, and exactly today, 5 years ago, the region of Afrin was completely fallen into the hands of Turkey and the Syrian opposition rebels. And here we see a picture of bombing near Cenderese. And first thing, actually, when the Syrian rebels and Turkey entered Afrin, this is, by the way, the statue of Kawa Hesenkar, Kawa the blacksmith, a mythical figure in the Kurdish culture, celebrated every year on 21st of March in Nowruz. And the first thing those rebels have done was taking down this statue. And it is funny because every time when such a political discussion starts, Turkish people say, or like opposition party people say, we are not against the Kurds, we are only against the terrorists. This statue has nothing to do with whatever political identity or whatever. Not the PKK, not the SDF, not the YPG. A blatant lie, again. Oops, it's going too fast. Yeah, I have to be fast. I have 5 minutes left. During the invasion of Afrin, actually, more than 2,000 people were killed. In the following years, so 5 years long, 8,700 people were kidnapped, arrested. A lot of women were actually kidnapped and raped. And here I want to talk about specific event. There was in 2020 an infighting between two groups from the Syrian rebels, and people stormed the headquarters of the Hamzat division. And by accident, it was a prison. Those women get freed, not all of them, but those women were actually held for 2 years long without any reason. And I want to mention their names because they have names. Lonjin Abdo, Rojin Abdo, Roshan Amoni, Haifal Jassim, Nauruz Abdo, Rokan Molla, Arin Dali, and Nadia Suleiman. We may have heard of Nadia Murad, but here we have another Nadia, unfortunately. And it was by accident, and this is what we know, and there is a lot about what we don't know. The occupation of Afrin is not only about harassing the human rights, but also destruction on multiple levels. We have ecological levels, we have archaeological and cultural level. And Afrin, here are pictures of Afrin, how green, mountainy it is. Olive trees. Ironic that the Turkish state called it olive branch. I'm afraid no olive branch will be left over a couple of years because they are all cut down. And here I will be showing some screenshots actually of before and after, because an estimate has been made about 600,000 trees were cut down by the Syrian rebels. And those are not very recently updated, but it gives you an idea how big the scale of destruction is. Here is in Afrin, we see how green it is. No, sorry, it was here, 2018. 2022, this is Barsa Khatun, a Yazidi cultural religious site, mount, and here we see actually how everything was here green and it is now gone. Again, 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 again. Again. So this was on the ecological side. Imagine the scale of destruction. Reports by human rights organizations that stated that 59 archaeological sites in Afrin has been destroyed or looted. This is Indara temple. It was bombed on the first day of the invasion. And this lion, the giant sculpture, it was gone. It was stolen. A giant which is more than 3 meters high, it was stolen in 2019, and nobody knows how. Transporting such a big giant lion needs a state actor. It is not an act of some groups or I don't know. And to make it even worse, the Syrian rebels in 2019 posted a video of them doing a military training, military drill action with live ammunition on this site. Imagine historical site, which is 3,000 years old. You are going to perform a military training. Shooting and throwing, and not only performing military actions, but also excavations actions. You see the traces. They are searching for, I don't know what. Here is Nabi Huri, Syros, again. These also all excavated and dug everywhere. The last aspect, I wonder if we still have time, 5 more minutes, is the demographic engineering, which is actually very important. I have already said the invasion of Afrin has caused between 120,000 to 300,000 people to flee actually Afrin. And during the time that Afrin was attacked, Russia and Assad was attacking the south of Syria, specifically Al-Ghouta. So thousands of people from Al-Ghouta were actually displaced. What Turkey does, displace the people from Afrin, expel the Kurds from Afrin, and let those peoples from Al-Ghouta and elsewhere to be housed in Afrin. But the problem here is, it is not only actually people living in tents or internally displaced people. For those people, full villages and houses are being built. It doesn't help me actually, this anyway. It's too fast. Can we do anything about this? Yeah. So we see how the settlements are built. And this is actually not new. If you know the history, this is also another picture, how trees are cut down and settlements are built. Again. Okay, this is not very weird, actually, if you know the history. Here I'm using a picture from the dissertation of our speaker, Ur, and it says, young Turks officials deporting Kurds in 1916 in Turkey. And this picture, the second one, is Kurds fleeing Afrin in 2018. Unfortunately, the earthquake has accelerated the building of the settlements under the label of rebuilding Afrin. But you are rebuilding Afrin for who? For Kurds who are not actually living there, or for Arabs to be housed there forever? I can't make it any long, but I want to say one more thing. I started with Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. And I have said they share the same fate of the Kurds of Afrin to have hostile neighbors. But one very important difference between us and Afrin, between us, people of Afrin, and Ukrainian peoples. Ukrainian peoples got help from the West. German Leopards, the Bayraktar UAVs, Turkish UAVs, to defend themselves. While we, the Kurds, got the same Leopard, but to be killed with. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a very short seat here. That was very impressive. Thank you very much. I also learned some new stuff, I have to say. I can see it touches you also, and I think many of us who listened. You were also in the group who organized this event this afternoon.
Yeah.
You told us a lot, but what do you hope for this afternoon in the discussion?
I hope that our voice will be heard. We don't expect actually people to help us liberate Afrin now, but we want to make a statement here. Afrin is Kurdish and will be Kurdish. And no matters what Turkey will do, and no matters the proxies of Turkey will do there to normalize the occupation under the earthquake aid or whatever action, Afrin is Kurdish and should stay Kurdish. And I hope the war, as well in Afrin as in whole Syria, will end soon, because it is unbearable what's going on there.
Okay, thanks a lot, and a lot of strength for you and your family. Please, thanks again, Peshmerga Morat. And I'd like to introduce the next speakers. Please join me at the table. Dastan Yassim, yes, please. Researcher at the German Institute for Global and Area Studies in Hamburg, focusing on Kurdistan and specifically on Kurdish civic culture in Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We can applaud. And on my right, we have Arya Yemo, independent humanitarian and human rights activist, and you have worked with several NGOs to provide humanitarian aid to refugees in Kurdistan and in Greece. Yeah, also very welcome for you. And you both came from Paris today, I heard, right?
Yeah.
Okay, welcome. Thank you for
Thank
coming here, being here. Arya, how did you listen to Pesh's story? His historical overview.
No, it was very good. It was very on point and relevant. And I was actually taking notes to add some points to what Peshmerga has been showing you. Is at the beginning he made the introduction about how in Russia, unfortunately, we have this state racism that is raising towards the Ukrainians. And he highlighted how the Turkish politics, actually involved in this. And by all the journalists that is being imprisoned in Turkey and all the media that are being controlled. Currently, we have this state racism that is raising as well. So unfortunately, it's not only the state, but also the people that were supporting the invasion of Afrin and all that Peshmerga has shown you.
Which media do you mean? You said the media is controlled?
The whole public opinion of Turkey was supporting what you just saw. Up to the sport with, for example, the big worldwide known Turkish football club, up to the national team that was doing the military sign in France. I was living in France and I could see Turkish football player doing this, saluting what they were doing at the same time in my region. I was like, this is crazy. This is crazy. It's not only about just military operation. This is much more, and Peshmerga has shown it, yeah.
And it's also a personal story for you, because your family is from Afrin. Do they still live there now, or are they in the European Union?
Correct. So I'm Kurdish Yazidi. So Yazidi is a very ancient religion, more than 6,000 years old. It's part of the heritage that you can see with this lion. We have a really rich heritage on the region, and Yazidi are part of it with the Christian and so on. And everyone was used to live in peace. We were used to live in peace there. There was discrimination, but not as much as we see now. Now, no one is left. So in the village of my mom, that is Bafloun, that is only Yazidi, no one is left. You cannot stay as a Yazidi. You cannot stay as a Christian there. You cannot stay as a Kurd there. So no one is left. And something that I would like to highlight in Peshmerga presentation, you might have seen a picture of someone in the olive tree field, and his face was hidden. This is the reality of the ground. We have to hide the face of the Kurds. We have to hide the face of the people we know there. Otherwise, they're in danger. As a humanitarian activist, I'm helping in Afrin following the earthquake because the Kurds are being discriminated, they don't have help, and I have to do the same thing. I have to hide the people that are helping. I have to hide the people that we're helping. And yeah, this is the current situation.
And before I go to Dastan, can you tell us a bit more about the different minorities who live right now in Afrin? So Peshmerga give us some historical overview, but who live there at the moment?
There are no minorities left. There are no minorities left, and if there are any left, they will be hidden. They will be not saying that they are either Kurds, that they're either Yazidi or something.
And where did they go?
They will either be refugees or stay in the villages because our homes in Afrin and so on have been stolen. So we had a home in Genderes, that is one of the main cities in the region. We had a home in Afrin, and they've been taken. So we've lost everything, the field, the home, the family, and everything.
Thank you. And Dastan, you are an expert on Kurds and their struggle. What's the significance of Afrin to the overall Kurdish struggle? Can you explain something to us about this?
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me, and thanks for this great introduction. Especially for people from Afrin to talk about this is extremely hard because the chapter Afrin is, as many chapters actually in Kurdish history, a chapter where Kurdish people have to explain that the horrible things that are happening to them are actually happening. And that is a 100-year history. And so I say the significance of Afrin is on two levels. The first level would be the symbolic level. So this area, Afrin, used to be the French mandate for a long time. So a lot of the Kurdish people that were fighting against the Young Turks and Mustafa Kemal Atatürk later, they were actually in this area leading their resistance because they couldn't stay there. Figures, big national Kurdish figures like Nuri Dersimi were in this region the whole time, and so it's a very important region with a lot of Kurdish history that is specifically being destroyed right now. And also it's one of the blatant cases of double occupation. As if it's not enough to be occupied by Syria, you're being occupied by not only Turkey, but Islamist forces. Islamist forces that have taken over oppositional Syrian discourses in the diaspora, claiming that they are the victims, but at the same time they're doing things that sometimes even Assad wouldn't dare to do. And that is one of the realities there.
And you write a lot about this double occupation.
Yeah.
Is this some kind of new type of occupation, or did we miss this before?
Exactly. That's the second. That's the second layer. The second layer is from a military strategic point of view. What we see is that actually, more and more in the last years, many areas in Kurdistan are now like under double occupation. So Afrin is under this multiple occupation that we see right now, and we see that multiple countries that have nothing in common all of a sudden can work together when it's about fighting against the Kurds. And you see that also, for example, in Iraqi Kurdistan, there are the so-called disputed territories where also my family is coming from, and they are not only under Iraqi occupation, but also under Iranian militia occupation. And that is a reality in these areas. And all of a sudden, everyone can work together. So one of the big problems that we have, especially when we look at international law and political answers to the occupation in Afrin and all of these other regions, is that a lot of people talk about international law and how this is breaching international law because Syria is being attacked. But Syria is happy that this is happening. And the war in Afrin was started actually by Russia, giving YPG an ultimatum, and YPG was not willing to take up that ultimatum, which was that they should
just to explain who the YPG is for the people who don't know.
The YPG is the People's Defense Forces. It's the strongest military Kurdish force in this area. It was already founded in the 2000s, actually. It has a strong presence in this area for a long time, and they were the main forces when fighting also against ISIS, which is another layer of this subject of Afrin, is that while Afrin was occupied and attacked, 2018 was also the year when ISIS was finished on the ground. And that was thanks to YPG, and that was thanks to the Kurdish forces, which were pushed out in this area at the same time. So another layer that one should not forget is that actually the international war against ISIS was fought by the same Kurdish people that were openly eradicated from this area. So really with Afrin, there's a lot of layers, and it's surprising how it has absolutely no relevance in the discourse right now.
And if we look at Afrin at the moment, who rules the territory de facto? Like, who is there now on the ground ruling the region?
Well, it actually belongs to the same governorate as Hatay, which is another occupied region. Hatay, which used to be a region full of Armenian people, which was occupied by Turkey from the 30s on. And it's also now under Turkish governoring. But at the same time, on the floor, on the ground, you have a lot of different militias. You have the Sultan Murad division. You have the Turkmen militias. You have a lot of different groups that are known for the human rights abuses. And at the same time, specific kidnapping is also happening there. So we see that there is occupation, economic occupation, exploitation. The Turkish lira is actually used in this area because Turkey is also using it as an economic exclave, as a colony, if you will. But at the same time, what these groups are also doing is that they are kidnapping people, Kurdish people from this area, into Turkey to have legal cases against them in Turkey. So this region is by Turkey institutionally, military, legally seen as theirs. It's occupied as theirs. And the fact that a NATO partner is doing that, should tell you a lot about the values.
Before I go to Arya, can you tell us a bit more about the Russian interest in Syria and also specifically that region?
Well, Peshmerga already said what was happening at that time was the big operation in eastern Ghouta. And what we have to remember is that when we look at the Syrian map is that back then in the west of Syria, there were still patches of different oppositional Syrian influence. And eastern Ghouta was one of the last ones in the southern western area. So when they were pushing the people out, they were more and more going for a situation where all of these oppositional groups were pushed into Idlib area and they had to relocate these people there. Obviously, Turkey was not going to take these refugees, and Europe has no interest in taking these refugees as well, which was also very clear. We shouldn't forget that since 2016, there is an agreement between the European Union and Turkey, which is subsidized by millions and millions of euros for Turkey to do exactly these policies. For Russia, they had the interest to push these people back into this region, and that is what they gave why they gave this ultimatum to Afrin. They said in January 2018, YPG, so the Kurdish Defense Forces, should go away from this area. They should be given complete control. They already had a lot of the airspace under their control, and that was the ultimatum that was given. What was happening after that, and Peshmerga also talked about all the territories and the occupation that is happening and the settlements that were put up by a Qatari group, by a Kuwaiti group, by all of these groups. This was put up in order to bring these people there. And for Russia, that was the interest behind that, to kind of find a final solution to take over this territory. And we shouldn't forget that besides Russia and the Syrian government, another group that is very active in these occupational policies is Iran. Iran, on the floor, on the ground, is doing everything they can to justify that they are in this region. They are finding Shiite graves everywhere. I didn't know that there are so many Shiite graves in this area, but they find one every 2 kilometers. And by that, they justify their occupation. So more than one occupying force, indeed.
And Arya, what does this geopolitical power play mean for people on the ground there, and especially if we look into the aftermath of the earthquake, also economically?
So for the people on the ground, you know, there are many forces, militia forces, that goes from jihadis, that goes from all the way to Turkish-backed militia. And people there used to call them Jesh el-Khair, is the common word that we use, because it's all different type of militia that are doing different exactions on different locations and so on. For example, some report and testimonies that we had is we managed finally to have a Kurdish organization helping in Afrin following the earthquake. But we had people on the ground, Kurds in the villages, telling the militias are putting checkpoints and preventing us to go to collect the aid brought by the Kurds. And the aid were also sold, the UN aid, where it's written to not sail, were sold to the Kurds. So the humanitarian action consists of giving money to the Kurds so they can buy the humanitarian aid that we have to receive. This is the current situation on the ground. People don't have, you know, it's very interesting. You discover really a lot of things when you work with people in Afrin. They don't have access to SIM card. So they sometimes have SIM card that they bought eSIMs online. Thailand number, Vietnamese, anything. They don't have Syrian number, Turkish number.
And why don't they have the access? Like they cannot buy it, or it's
they
forbidden?
cannot buy it. They're afraid it's going to be surveillance and so on. For example, with the people I'm working it on the ground, when they go through a checkpoint, they have to erase my number, erase all the WhatsApp conversation and so on, because they check the phones. If by unluck there is a phone number from Europe, they will be kidnapping that person, calling the number that they found. We want 15,000 euro, or we will kill that person. And this is a testimony that already happened in my family, but it happened also in the Kurds of Afrin that are around you. So when you see like a Kurdish from Afrin, you will be like, okay, you know what his family have been through. You've seen the settlement. And for example, one picture that Peshmerga showed was actually my dad's village. This is a settlement of the village of Shadere, and our shrine there were destroyed. Our graves were destroyed as well because they can be identified, so we cannot go back. That's the situation that we're in. And Peshmerga has highlighted something very interesting, is that for finally the Yazidi in Afrin were having a little bit of breeze, a little bit of rights, because under the Syrian Assad regime, we were mentioned as Muslim. We had to go to mosque on Friday. We had to learn the Quran, but we are not Muslim, but we are forced to be.
You mean between 2012 and 2018, Yazidis had some...
Under the Bashar al-Assad regime. And for 6 years, finally, the Kurds got control. We have a center. We can finally express ourselves. And now it's became even worse than Bashar. So the Yazidi are like, wow, now we die. Before we couldn't be what we were. Now, if we are Yazidi, we are dying. This is the current situation of the people on the ground.
And Dastan, you talked a bit about IS also, but what can you tell about the IS fighters who are now in the occupied territory of Syria?
Oh, well, there's a lot of them. I mean, you know, the U.S. envoy to the Syrian conflict, Brett McGurk, has said this, for example, repeatedly, that all of these areas, whether it's Afrin or whether it's Idlib, which is the bordering area, which is controlled by an organization that formerly was directly linked to Al-Qaeda. Now they have a different name. In these areas, Islamic State fighters are so present that actually just 3 weeks ago, when I was watching footage that was uploaded by this organization on Twitter, by the White Helmets, I watched how they were saving people, getting people out of buildings, and you literally see a guy with an ISIS uniform helping earthquake victims. And that's how present these people are. So these people have all of the legitimacy, all of the presence in this area. So actually, this kind of occupation is helping ISIS. And also, what we know is from a lot of operations of the anti-terror forces of the YPG in Al-Hol camp, we know that the infrastructure, the money, the support that people have in Al-Hol camp and Rush camp, Islamists that are there, is always traceable back to Idlib or Afrin area where these Islamists are right now. And even in Islamist attacks here in Europe, we see that a lot of them had contact to this area. One example is, for example, there was a French teacher that was decapitated some years ago, and the attacker who did it, his last contact, was in this Turkish occupied area. And let's not forget Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he was found in this area. So that's how much Turkey loves to fight ISIS.
And do you think there's a difference in how media report on IS violence and Turkish state violence?
I mean, it's...
If we're talking about, Western media?
I mean, it's very obvious. And the thing is, like, it's like this with Turkey for 100 years. So even when ISIS was not existing, when Turkey was a military dictatorship, when Turkey was Islamist dictatorship, when Turkey was whatever Turkey was, there was always a reason to justify what Turkey is doing. I mean, I come from Germany. If there is any country in the Middle East that Germany loves, it's Turkey, right? Because it's one of the oldest partners, not only from a NATO point of view, but it goes even older. The German Kaiserreich was working with the Ottoman Empire. It was Germany that helped Ottoman Empire to have the infrastructure to make this genocide against the Armenian people, all of that. So it's a very, very long history of bigotry, not only towards the reporting on ISIS. If people would take ISIS seriously, they would, for example, engage with the forces, the Kurdish forces on the ground, and set up an international tribunal with which these ISIS fighters could be taken before court. But that is unfortunately not happening. So definitely a big bias there.
Do you think, if we're talking about Afrin, it's of course a lot portrayed as a ethnic struggle, as that the fight is about ethnicity. Do you agree with this frame?
Look, the thing is, for Kurdish people, of course, they are being attacked on an ethnic level. They are stripped of their identity, their history, everything. They are, you know, they're not permitted to exist, right? But that has political reasons. And then on the other side, if you look at it, the Kurdish movements, not only in Syria, but in Iraq, in Iran, and in Turkey, they have always been the backbone of whatever democratization movement was happening in these countries. It's because the Kurds themselves have analyzed that their issue the symptom might be right now ethnic oppression, but it's about more than that. It's about gender liberation, it's about ecological liberation, it's about all of these points. So it's no coincidence that in Iran, Jinjian Azadi, a Kurdish motto, has become the motto, and it's the same in Syria, that the only viable opposition to Bashar al-Assad was not the Free Syrian Army, it was the Kurdish people. Not because it's about ethnicity, but it's about democracy overall.
Do you agree with this?
Yeah, and I would like to add something about the ISIS fighter, because I think it is very important. You know that, as Dastan have said, there are some very important ISIS, so Daesh in French, important people in the region of Idlib and Afrin that are covered by Turkey. And guess what? The American and the coalition are looking after them. They're like, we want you, we want to catch you. Turkey is not happy with that. You know how Turkey is not happy with that? Because when the operation, and Turkey being a NATO, an ally of the West, etc., well, when the coalition and the US want to target those ISIS head, they go through Kurdistan. They don't want the Turkish authorities. And the Turkish authorities has been like, I've been saying to US, why you don't warn us? But guess why the US won't warn Turkey about that? Because Turkey would hide those people. Something also that is very interesting that Peshmerga has shown about the security concern about the small region of Afrin. Afrin is not a security concern. Afrin is a military base. Afrin is 3,850 meters square of a military base. You have to see it like that. The first thing we have seen is the schools were transformed into military camps with people having some new fashion rebranding of Ottoman Empire with Arabic writing, with Turkish flag. And this is the reality. The mercenaries that have been training there, the whole strategy makes sense. When you see that they're removing the trees while the olives is one of the most known, why would you not make the business prosperous and earn money on a yearly basis? No, they cut it down. The less the economy is, the less the region is unstable, mixed, because there are not only Arabs from Ghouta that are not based there, local. They want to mix it. They want to create a mess where people are in poverty, so there will be mercenaries. That's what is happening. They're creating mercenaries with special camps, with ISIS heads there, and it started. They've been sent to Libya. This is by facts. They've been sent to Armenia. This is by facts, by Turkey. So Afrin is now a military region, a camp for all the ISIS fighters. And this is just a clock. It's just ticking. Because Al-Hol is having 7,000 Europeans that join ISIS. 7,000. This is a force. This is a proper army. If you count the ones that are here and the military equipment that Peshmerga has shown, it is a big force. It is a big, big force. Especially that all the commercial and economy, for example, the big lion, was sold through Turkey. It's the only gateway. The olive tree. We're buying, literally, if you go in Germany, you buy olive from Afrin, from this jihadist. Imported by whom? Turkey. Produced by whom? Turkey. So that's what it is currently, Afrin. And ISIS is something, it's a clock that is ticking for the West. And they will realize, but too late.
Before we move to music and our next panel, Dastan, hearing all these different parties and their different interests, who are the allies of the Kurds, actually?
The Kurds themselves.
They don't have any other ally.
The mountains?
The Chiaye Kurd. No, the thing is like...
No country, nothing.
I mean, the US are in the game for their own interest, but if you compare the US mandate that they have in Syria, it's such a limited mandate that actually the US cannot put one stone on the other to even start to construct a prison or something like that. I mean, these ISIS fighters are all sitting in schools and former hospitals. There are some political entities that have some interest once in a while to work with the Kurds or whatever. But the thing is, and that's if you like where are Syria, Iran, Iraq, and Turkey on the same page? It's the Kurds. So the problem is that as long as there is no intra-Kurdish connection and cooperation, there is not going to be a big case for other countries supporting that. And you know, you see that whether it's Iranian drones or Turkish drones, the point of attack is always Kurdistan. And also, if you look at the history overall, I mean, you know, Peshmerga said it very nicely also with Turkey, you know. In Turkey right now, you know, you have the election campaign happening, and you have an opposition, so-called opposition, and you have the Erdogan, MHP, AKP coalition. And at the end of the day, the common denominator for all of these groups is hating Kurdish people, right? So that's the issue. On that note, I'm not very optimistic, but what is a point of solidarity is society. Yeah, societies all over the world, societies, non-state actors, internationalists, all the groups that have been vital also in supporting the Kurdish side in the fight against ISIS and all the other fights, that's very important. So, I mean, something that what we're doing right now to even talk about these issues, to show solidarity, that's the most important resource that one has.
We're going to talk about the reaction of the international community in the second panel. First, we're going to listen to some music again, because music is also solidarity. And we're going to listen to Sipan Mirkan, and I forgot to mention before, Karvan Hamid Halak. And he is a musician from Kurdistan living in the Netherlands. He's a Kurdish singer, songwriter, and musician. He plays the duduk, the balaban, and other wind instruments. So he and Sipan will play for us. Let's listen.
Yeah.
مقام بیاتر
Slavlete Afrinamın Buan hestirin gudubarın Slavlete Afrinamın Buan hestirin gudubarın Dergahindir hatın gırtın Betereş bu jiyanamın Dergahindir hatın gırtın Betereş bu jiyanamın
Right into the soul. Thank you, Spas. We will listen to you again in the end of the evening. And I want to introduce our next speakers. Kati Piri, Dutch Member of Parliament. Please join the table. And also Uğur Ümit Üngür, Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Please join us here. Kati, you are a member of the Dutch Labour Party, also former Europarliamentarian. And you served also as the Parliament's reporter on Turkey's EU membership. Welcome. And Uğur, I said University of Amsterdam, but you're also a professor at the NIOD, and your main areas of interest are global history and sociology of genocide and mass violence, with a particular focus on the modern and contemporary Middle East, and you have published multiple publications on these issues. Kati, how did you listen to the former panel? Did you hear anything notable, something you did not know?
A lot, and I'm very pleased to be invited to, I think, this very important event. Not because I'm an expert on Syria. I've never visited the region we are talking about. The only way, of course, I dealt with it was as Turkey rapporteur in the European Parliament. But it reminded me very much about very often the stories that I hear from Kurdish friends. Reminded me of when I visited Diyarbakir in 2016, what was happening there, having seen the city one year before.
In Turkey, yeah.
In Turkey, in the north of Kurdistan. And the tremendous pain that is not new, unfortunately, to the Kurdish people, that just doesn't seem to be an end to it, right? So I was very touched by the personal stories, and I think it's very important that you organize this event and that you raise attention to what is happening there.
Uğur, do you have something to add to this?
No, I think it's really important that that we, don't lose track of the events and some of the major changes going on in Afrin in the past couple of years. Because we all remember when it happened. It's in the media for a couple of weeks, couple of months, and then after that people forget and they move on with the next crisis. So I think it's important actually to stop and to observe and to see and to try to make sense exactly what type of changes are going on there. And I appreciated a number of concepts that were that flew around the room, such as demographic engineering. That's an important question. Did the Turkish Republic, the Turkish army, with their number of their proxies, did they aim at demographic engineering in this region, and to what extent did they achieve that? Now, that's an open question that needs to be researched, and fortunately we have some really good people doing that research. Another issue, second, I think, something that we have to be a little bit self-critical also. As Kurds from Turkey, of course, we very often we observe the events in Rojava as almost as an extension of what's happening in northern Kurdistan. But of course, every time I hear the term as a historian and as a political analyst, every time I hear the word, the term the Kurds, I always have to stop and have to be a little bit more critical, because very often we're dealing with a political actor that claims to speak on behalf of the Kurds.
For example?
Well, take the YPG, for example, take the PYD, or take any other political party, that's a Kurdish political party, that claims to speak, for example, for an entire nation of tens of millions of people. Nobody knows how many exactly. And that we also have to be a little bit critical towards that. So we need to think of Kurds not only as eternal victims, right? There is victimization. 100%. And I'm somebody who was, put in 2 decades of my life in investigating and researching that victimization across Kurdistan. But also Kurds have political agency. Kurds are normal human beings like everybody else. They make mistakes. They are sometimes indeed a force for democratic change, definitely. But in other cases, they are a force for more reactionary or authoritarian change. And so, we need to also, keep an eye on those nuances and those sometimes inconvenient truths. They also need to be examined.
So we have to look at it from different perspectives.
Always.
And your own research is a lot about state violence. So if you look at present-day Afrin, what does it teach us about history? If you look at state violence.
Well, a lot. First of all, this is not the first region that Turkey invaded and then basically annexed. So the province of Hatay already mentioned in 1939, which is now bona fide province of the Turkish Republic. But also think of northern Cyprus in 1974. Let's not forget that. I mean, that conflict could have gone in a different direction, but it didn't go that way. The Turkish army invaded and they expelled a large number of Greeks from the north of Cyprus. But also Armenians, for example. And I know a significant number of Armenians who were neither Greek nationalists nor Turkish, didn't want to be involved in this conflict, and yet they were expelled, and yet their houses were taken and whatnot. So there's a long tradition of demographic engineering by the Turkish Republic, externally, but also internally. Take a campaign like in Dersim in 1937-38. This is the largest, the most violent episode in the history of the Turkish Republic, in which Ataturk's forces, the army, not even with militias or proxies, but like the actual army, gendarmerie, invaded, massacred, deported, forcibly assimilated a large number of people in Dersim. And so the operation in Afrin brings back echoes from that past.
Mm-hmm. And if we look, for example, at the Lausanne Treaty 100 years ago and the Olive Branch operation, do we have to look at these things as separate events or more as a continuum?
Well, of course, the Lausanne Treaty is not a multicultural, inclusive, woke environment. This is a treaty that establishes the Turkish nation state that's unitary. Which gives the Turkish government, of course, Kurds and Armenians are forgotten there, but more importantly, not only Kurds and Armenians, but also other minorities. Take Arab communities in Turkey. So the Lausanne Treaty foresees the imposition of an identity on these territories and on these populations, and that identity is Turkish-speaking, Sunni Muslim, heterosexual. So there are certain ideals of citizenship that the Lausanne Treaty across different Turkish governments, so independent from whatever government is in power, across different governments, the Lausanne Treaty imposes a type of homogenization, which also we see now in Afrin. So it's not surprising at all in any way.
Mm-hmm. Kati, during the Olive Branch operation, you were Europarliamentarian. What was your reaction at that moment? Being a Europarliamentarian?
Well, of course, we have seen 3 military operations of Turkey, and I very well remember, of course, staying also in touch with, my contacts are normally in Turkey, being in touch with various also sister parties, for instance, of my party. And one of them is a Kurdish one, which is the HDP, and the other one is, of course, CHP, a more nationalist and partly social democratic party. And of course, the reactions were totally different from that side. I think it was clear to the European Parliament that this was an illegal operation. But to be honest and fair, also here around the table, not something that Europe could very well do something about. And that's, of course, the difficult thing. I'm not a historian. I studied international relations. But if you look in 2018, the position of Turkey, just 2 years ago, the EU has struck this major migration deal with the country. Turkey is still a big country, and it lies where it is. Where we already had some issues with Russia, and you don't want to push the country towards that direction. And unfortunately, in these cases, it's not international law or it's not fairness that is often what comes out of it. Mm-hmm. But in the end, a lot of words, but in the end, not a lot is happening when it comes to a clear reaction to what Turkey has been doing there.
You also wrote in 2019, the EU has been unable to hit the right note in its dialogue with Turkey. So what should be the right note, you think?
Well, that we can do a separate event on, but it's still not hitting the right note. I think, first of all, we are very much focused on Turkey as, first of all, being the government, instead of looking at the population and the people. And I'm afraid that we are losing, with the way the European Union is reacting to Turkey, we are losing the Democrats in Turkey. That's my biggest concern, because there are many Democrats in Turkey who would want their country to go into a different direction. I think one thing which we will see now in the elections is, of course, the Kurdish vote is crucial, also in this election. I also, of course, very much recognize by what people have been saying that in a way the Kurds, I think rightfully for a long time hoped that it was with the AKP party that the Kurdish question could come to a solution. It's clear that that hope is gone. But if you look in north of Kurdistan, which parties people are voting, it's either the HDP, the pro-Kurdish party, or it's the AKP. And, you know, it was not illogical to think that these are the sides that will have to come to an agreement. Unfortunately, things went in a very different direction. Well, just to give a final word on that, what I'm very disappointed at, because why is Turkey interested in Syria? One of those reasons is, of course, the Kurdish question. It's clear that's why we are having this day here. And when I became rapporteur in 2014, when I'm not saying it was a very successful one, but at least at that moment there was still hope that there would come some type of agreement to the Kurdish question, where in the EU, every time when we had visits with Turkish officials, on top of the agenda was the Kurdish question. And why? Because we knew that Turkey could never become a real democracy without solving the Kurdish question. And that is completely gone. We are 2023, and no one in the EU, not in the Commission, not in any other places, are talking about trying to press the Turkish government for solving it in a democratic way, because we all know there is no military solution to a question like this.
Before I open up to you two, Kati mentions European interest with Russian relations, the refugee deal. How does this relate to Western responsibility to take action in the history, if you look at the Kurds in Afrin?
Well, the key moment in Western engagement with Turkey or with the Ottoman Empire is the period between the Sevr Treaty and the Lausanne Treaty. In the Sevr Treaty, there's still an independent Kurdistan and independent Armenia. And with the Lausanne Treaty, which is often presented as the kind of single effort of Kemal Ataturk, who bravely withstood, but that's not necessarily the case, of course. You know, yes, there is a military engagement by Kemalist forces in that period, and they wrest a lot of territory, that's true. But the Turkish Republic, the Lausanne Treaty was signed between Turkey and the West. So at some point, European states, they gave up on Kurds and Armenians, which later came back with a vengeance, of course. You know, when later Armenians, for example, start lobbying for recognition of the genocide, that's not very surprising. Or later, when Kurdish political parties, first peacefully, but then later, out of necessity, also the armed struggle, that's not very surprising. So, I mean, if we look at it from that perspective, I mean, Kati is absolutely right. It is a huge country. It's a NATO partner. It was an EU accession process. And so it has it gets these Leopard tanks from from Germany or from France or wherever. And this is the partner that you basically have to deal with, which also means you have to accept implicitly or explicitly, or you can talk to them as much as you want, about some of their nationalist obsessions. And two of their major nationalist obsessions are still really Armenians and Kurds, right? So there are, of course, problems relating to transparency or journalistic freedom or the position of the Alevis, for example, in Turkey. That's all true. But the two major issues still, really in the history of the Turkish Republic, that's hardwired, is there's a border that's closed with Armenia. There's no recognition of the historic pain of Armenians. And second, there is a border that is volatile, that is a border with the Kurdish areas in Syria, also with Iraq. There's a minority, a Kurdish minority inside. And Turkey has always, the Turkish Republic has always seen Syria, especially northern Syria, really as a dumping ground of peoples. So take the city of Qamishli, for example. This is the first city I ever visited in Syria. If you you go around in Qamishli and you speak to people, there's a disproportionate number of people who are originally not from Qamishli, who are originally from the areas north of Qamishli, from Mardin, Diyarbakir, Bingöl, as far as up to Dersim was already mentioned. And that's because, Syria is seen as kind of terra nullis. It's a kind of empty space. We can dump people there that we don't need, we don't want in our own society. And this Afrin operation and the Ghouta refugees it fits perfectly, really, in that history.
Dastan, I asked Kati before about how the European Union acted or could act, and you also wrote a lot about the German reaction to what's happening in Afrin. What are, according to you, the steps Western countries could take towards justice?
Well, I mean, there would be a lot of points where you could start. One would be not sending weapons to these countries. How about that? But I think there are a lot of other avenues. If we look at the 2000s, one of the good outcomes of the EU accession process was that there was some kind of deal on the table that could be negotiated, something that would keep Turkey on the table to negotiate some things. And we know, for example, that since 2004, for example, Turkey has implemented some policies because of this EU pressure that allowed it for civil society organizations to work more freely. Many people talk about the early 2000s as kind of a blossoming of some civil society organizing of the Kurdish people, and actually a time where also the municipalities, the Kurdish municipalities, had some possibility to breathe. But what we're seeing is that Turkey, especially during the last years of Erdogan's rule, has gone into a direction of actively following a non-alignment position. That's what Turkey wanted, and that's what they have right now. So they are basically, able to sell Bayraktars to the Ukraine, while hosting a financing mechanism for Russian people that now in masses come to Turkey, or either to invest or to do holidays or all these kind of things. But another issue that is very important for countries like Germany, but also other countries in the European Union, is to understand that the Kurdish question is a transnational question. It's being fought out here. And what is happening, for example, in Germany, is that whenever Kurdish people would go to the streets, and for example, during the occupation of Afrin, I wrote about this in several newspapers, is that all of a sudden public is opening a discourse where they say Kurdish people that are protesting for their rights are not integrated in European society, which is incredible. People are actively taking a stance against occupation, against autocratization, and it's presented like it's an un-European thing for these people to do that. When actually, if they would support this and these kind of movements also here in Europe, they would have a stronger hand against Islamism. And although I recognize that Kurdish people, of course, like any other people, have their problems, Kurdish people, as one of the few societies in the Middle East, took up the agency to discuss things like Islamism. I remember very clearly that, for example, in the days of the fight against ISIS, there was a very vivid, strong discussion in Kurdish society why Islamic people and mosques are not taking a stance against ISIS. Because for Kurdish people, a lot of the discussion happened where it was like, okay, is the religion that we have by a majority trying to kill all of us? Is this what we're going to? Is this the discussion that we're having? And that's the thing, like there is a living discussion, a universalist discussion, if you will. It's not only about Turkey or whatever, it's about the values that we have to have. And I think that's the overall vision also for the Middle East. It's also about the Middle East taking up agency. People cannot victimize themselves forever. They need to take up responsibility. And that's also a reason why no one in the Middle East really talks about this. If you look at Arab media, if you look at Persian media, Turkish media, is there any mention of Afrin? Is there any mention of Kurdish people? Is there any mention of these things? No. Because the pattern, because the story is one that is not beneficial for them. It's brown people killing brown people. And we have to accept that this is a discourse and that we have to talk about these discourses. And this discourse is happening in diaspora as well. And if we look at the influence of Turkish mosques, Turkish organizations, Turkish so-called humanitarian organizations that collect money here in Europe, that they then use to build occupation and settlements in Afrin, then we see that the discussion is right here. It's also domestic politics.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I would like to add two things that Astan just said before highlighting something that Jubo said that is very important. That even as a Yazidi refugee, so my parents flew from Afrin and so on as political activists, I'm in France. We are already not feeling safe as a Kurd in France, let that aside, okay? We're living there, literally the closest most to my place where I'm living in France. The teacher that was beheaded was not far from my home. Imagine the trauma. You're watching the TV, like,
The
wow.
Samuel Paty.
Exactly,
yes.
Samuel Paty. You're like, wow, this is all, like we came as a refugee here and we have the same people doing the same thing next to us. That is mind-blowing for a refugee that is having a trauma. And the second thing is, the closest mosque, that is a Turkish mosque, was celebrating with a piano concert during the invasion of Afrin. So it's all linked, absolutely. And two things that have been said that is very important, because these are facts, and this would give us some answer. Kati research, as other parliaments European, and it's very true, has said Europeans and European parliaments see that Turkey will be a democracy if they solve the Kurdish issue. This is a fact, right? This is like. On the other side, we have an historian, and a Kurdish historian, but please ask also the Armenian ones, ask also the Greek ones, that will say the exact same thing, and I invite you to do. Is that Turkey was built based on a treaty that was made by people not on the ground. British, French, and so on, be like, okay, we don't know the communities living there, we're just going to draw borders, and that's it. It's not our issue. We're doing this border for our economical interest. Since then, since Turkey was built that way, not considering the communities that were living there, Kurd, Greek, Armenians, etc., all the neighbors, even the Arabs, even other religions, Alawite, etc., they were having massacres until then. So how can we say that like the way of thinking of the West is wrong? Turkey will not be a democracy if they solve the Kurdish issue. They cannot solve the Kurdish issue because they've been built with the treaty that ignore all the other minorities. It's not only about the Kurdish issue, it's about all the communities around that are facing the same thing. So you're wondering, okay, Turkey won't be a democracy because they cannot solve the minorities issue. They have been built on it, the communities issue. So what's the point? We have to make a new treaty. We have to build Turkey in a different way. That's what the outcome is. Turkey cannot be a democracy with these problems. That gives us an answer.
Kati, what means do you have now as a parliamentarian at the national level in the Netherlands to involve in the situation now in Afrin?
An honest answer?
Yes, please.
Much less than I had as a member of the European Parliament. Because at least in the European Parliament, especially, of course, as Turkey rapporteur, when there were statements coming, from a multinational parliament with 27 member states, and my majority having positions, of course, that was a much stronger signal than, voices coming, I think, from one of those 27 parliaments. So, in foreign policy, I think the European Parliament plays a very, very important role. And I say this, and I still made the choice to go to national parliament. But, raising, I think a lot of it, what I learned, I mean, it's been now 8-9 years ago that I became Turkey rapporteur, that I, visited the region, and I still don't know so many things. So I think awareness is really one of them. And that is, inviting people to the parliament, having these type of discussions. I very, very much hope that the threats that we've been hearing in the last months coming from the Turkish government well, it doesn't look like now they can do it, but I very much hope that we will not see another military operation into Syria. I'm very concerned also when it comes in the next weeks going up to elections. We have always seen when in Turkey there are elections, the nationalist card is being played. And the nationalist card, they always play it with foreign policy. And that means Syria, that means anyway against the Kurds, and that means, Greece and Cyprus. Obviously, I think here in the national parliament, we should continue to raise the issue, which I'm also always trying when it comes as
that's
former
actually what
Turkey
you're saying.
rapporteur.
Our only means now is creating the awareness.
Well, I think a big plus of a national parliament, which I didn't have as European parliamentarian, is that you're much closer to public opinion. You know, in the European Parliament, very often it was, you know, like main news in Turkey when we said something, but in Holland, no one read it and no one knew it. And I think this is the big advantage of being in national parliament. It also means you have a key role when it comes to the national discussions on this issue, on shaping public opinion, on informing people about what is happening. And those tools are much stronger from The Hague than they were from Brussels.
I have a lot of questions, but I also actually want to see if there are any questions from the audience, because I think there also might be a lot of people with a lot of knowledge who are curious or who want to add something. So if you have a question or want to add something, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm moving on. And if you have a question, I'm coming up to you. If you miss something or you think something should be discussed. Yes.
Yeah. Good evening. I am Farhad Jafar, journalistic researcher working with the German and Dutch media. I'm originally from Afrin. I came here to Netherlands about 8 years ago. I just want to say something about Afrin. I agree with all of you, but there is something. I think, meanwhile, we are talking, nobody cares about Afrin. Not the European or anybody. Everybody now focusing about, that kind of basic problems, between Russia and the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine, this is a war in somehow on a European field. So I think nobody now care about Afrin or what's happening in Afrin. But also, I think they are supporting what's going on in Afrin just to stop the migration. About the Islamic and the IS, yes. Last summer, the Emir of IS in Levant had been killed in Genderes. Until now, a lot of IS members now in Afrin by Ahrar al-Sharqiyya. Ahrar al-Sharqiyya, our group now, are involved also in assassinating Havrin Khalaf during also the Turkish operation, not only in Afrin, in Sarikaniye also, and Guresepi. And the other stuff, we are about the demographic engineering. Yes, it's happening. Meanwhile, we are talking, it's not via. This is happening on my field, my mother field inside Afrin. Now they started about 100 apartments. It's been supported by UK aid. Can you believe in that? As example. Other things, like a week ago, can you also imagine some Palestinian or the Arabs in Israel? This is Arab, they have Israeli citizenship, Islamic organization. Also, they are supporting that kind of demographic engineering inside Afrin. Now, they publishing, okay, you can just support to start, houses to save people, such things like that. And the earthquake, what happened now in Afrin and the whole area, it's a golden opportunity, not only for Turkish, for all parts are involved in Syria. For Qatar is as example, because also are involved in demographic changing and engineering. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for the democratic engineering examples. Yes, I just want to ask something to Dastan, because, here. He also says we're talking about it and also what the different interests of the parties, but actually I have the feeling that no one cares about what happens in Afrin. Is this also the feeling you have?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I would like to add up on that point that you said about the Palestinian organizations and everything. That is a reality that is happening. And I would like, the fact that the West doesn't care about people in the Middle East, it's not surprising. That's how it has been for the last decades. But quite honestly, we are not even, as Kurdish people, not part of the historical writing of all of these other countries in the region as well. If you look at the publications, for example, that came up in the course of the Syrian revolution, right? A lot of people were posting about it, 12 years ago, and so on and so on. But when you look at these publications, almost none of them mention that Kurdish people were stripped of their identity, their legal documents, any of these things. It's like Kurdish people don't exist. I always call it the Salah ad-Din effect, because people in the Middle East only like to talk about Kurds when they mention Salah ad-Din. Why? Because he liberated Jerusalem for them. Wish he didn't. But that's the thing, you know, and that's the problem. So we need to talk about also the question of what place do Kurdish people even have in the history of the Middle East? Why do some powers, hegemonial powers, decide who gets to be an indigenous person in this region and who doesn't get to do it? And that's how history is written. And that's why that's also, again, the point of agency, is that Kurdish people deal with a very tiring discourse where it's always, you know, the West did this, America did this, Israel did this, but the same people that say these things would support an Islamist group, a secular Republican nationalist group, whatever kind of group, they would support all of them. And that's kind of also the issue with Afrin, is that when we say, okay, the West doesn't care, we also have to look at our neighbors and realize, why doesn't anyone care about our occupation? Why is occupation only happening when it's Israel, but it's not happening when you guys are doing it?
Would you agree, Ur, with the historical point of how Kurds are portrayed?
Well, I mean, we have to decide whether, you know, Europe doesn't care about people in the Middle East or they're interfering with people in the Middle East. So we have to make a decision there. But I actually like the subtitle of this talk, "We're Trapped Between Empires," which suggests there's an imperial involvement. So imperial involvement from, I guess, from Turkey and from Russia, and maybe even from Syria. But it suggests, you know, an empire is a term that's related to colonialism, which suggests that, there's a lot of research on it, that Kurdistan is an international colony. And, you know, there are people who've written about it already back in the 60s and the 70s. But if we take that seriously, I mean, in colonialism, you always have locals, natives, who collaborate with the imperial occupiers. Take the Dutch Indonesian army, right? So tens of thousands of people fought for the Dutch during the Indonesian War of Independence. Now, those people are also Indonesians. And the same thing here, you know, so take the AKP, right, in Turkey. The number of Kurds that supports the AKP is astounding. If you travel around in, like, cities in Bakur, in the northern Kurdistan,
40%, no?
We will see how much will vote, but you know, in the last couple of elections, consistently, you walk around in cities like, you know, Muş, Bitlis, Batman, Diyarbakir. You know, not all of these people are supporting the HDP, which means that not all of them are supporting Kurdish independence. Or take the example of even in the occupation of Afrin. I mean, little known fact, of course, in the Free Syrian Army, and there's a broad range of proxy groups or local groups. The Free Syrian Army, whatever groups under that, there's some Islamist groups, etc. Among the Free Syrian Army groups, there are also Kurdish groups. There are commanders, like take this guy, Azad Osman, for example, who never joined the YPG, never joined the PYD, calls himself a Kurd, has a patch of the Kurdish flag on his uniform, and on the other side, he has a patch of the Syrian Revolution, and he fights with the Turkish army in the occupation of Afrin, under the argument, under the guise that this operation is not against Kurds. He says, I'm a Kurd, but we are against the PYD. We want to get the PYD out. Now, that argument needs to be taken seriously if that's really the case. But when I say, you know, things are not as black and white, these things have to be taken very seriously and have to be examined, I think.
But if I could just add, that doesn't change anything about the systematic problem. There is also black cops that kill black people in the USA.
Absolutely.
It doesn't change something about that. And the problem is that I think overall it's about Kurdish self-rule. That's the point. And I think there are definitely Kurdish parties that also have a completely different idea of what Kurdistan they would like to have. I can also recommend, for example, a recent podcast by Al Monitor that came out some days ago about the Kurdish Hezbollah that AKP has made a deal with and everything. But at the end of the day, these people, a Kurd that is like voting for AKP, that person will become victim of racial discrimination or all that kind of thing regardless. So I think overall the systematic issue is still there.
But I think, for example, I think that's a nationalist presumption. If you would talk to those people who support the AKP, they do their Mawlid al-Nabawi, so the birthday of the Prophet, entirely in Kurdish. They go in the political party buildings, in the offices, they speak Kurdish. They call themselves Kurds. In public, they're on television. There's Kurdish television theater. So those people would be then Kurds-plained if we tell them, well, you're with the wrong political party, because that's also a form of agency, whether we like it or not. It is there. There's a reality there. There's a Kurdish battalion in ISIS, Abu Khattab al-Kurdi, who fought not as a Kurd, but lots of people that from Bashur were mobilized. So, and I think the trick is to try to understand how these internal divisions that are normal, or internal diversity, you can even say, is exploited by those empires. And I think that's the key question to focus on.
Well, I think the question is whether the hen or the egg was first. I think one was before the other.
Nice metaphor to end with.
Yes, but thank you for highlighting. If we talking about the Kurds, we have to define who are we talking about and what do these group of people want. I think Pesh, you want to add something? I also want to see if there's someone else who have just for me to see too. Okay, and then yes. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Farhad. I had to skip a lot of content I wanted to talk about during my speech, but good you have mentioned it. My question to Kati, you have said you are now in national Dutch politics and you can't do much. But please let me remind you of one thing. 18th of April 2018, a month after Afrin has fallen, I have seen a meeting from the Syrian opposition with a Dutch flag. And the label was discussing rebuilding Afrin. And remind you one more thing, the NLA program, non-lethal assistance program, the Dutch government has funded, sent 26 million to this Free Syrian Army, call them what you want. And part of that money was used. So I think as Dutch politician, you can do a lot. And you can do a lot for us, if not is liberating Afrin, but investigating the crimes that had happened because we actually assisted those people to invade Afrin. Thank you very much.
You want to react?
I mean, it's a clear point. Of course, you're also talking about a period when I was in the European Parliament and when this was happening in national parliaments. That doesn't mean that the issue is gone, right? Yeah. And that questions shouldn't be asked and that we should always look critical at our policies. But it's also, about, let me tell you also, as one of the 150 members of parliament, I also want to encourage you to make sure, and it doesn't only have to be me, but you're more than welcome to do it with me, is to send us information when you have it. We have, as a spokesperson on foreign policy, and also as a reaction to the gentleman there, it's true. I think it goes for every country that normally public opinion is very strong when something comes very close. So when in the war in Syria started in 2011, no one in Europe actually really was occupied with it until 2015-16 when the refugees started arriving, right? So I think it's also very human in a way. I'm not trying to say that it's good, but it also means that, inform your members of parliament. Make sure to send the information. We also don't physically have the time in 24 hours a day to make sure we get the latest information from all the conflicts and everything that is happening around the world. And what I have seen also both in Dutch parliament, and it's not an ideological issue, it's very often also about not knowing what is going on, not having the right information at the right time. So this is also a request to you, for those people who have family there, who are doing the research, please also share it with your members of parliament in the various countries where you are living in order also to take it up.
And how can they reach you? Can they send an email?
Well, I think if you Google my name, you find my email immediately.
That's the right way.
Yes, and for those here around, I'm happy to leave my phone number. I won't put it on internet, but for those who want it, of course, happy to do that. But if I just can say one last reaction also to the gentleman there, because I don't want to be too cynical, because in the end, I think we also very much realize that some of the issues that you don't address now are coming to hit you back later, as we have seen in the past as well. So I think, the fact that obviously all the news on foreign policy is now completely occupied by the war on this continent, that doesn't mean that there are no politicians, that there are no people in the ministries, that there are not people in the think tanks knowing very well if you, like we had in the past, ISIS wasn't a problem until it became a problem and they were blowing up cities in Europe. So I think that's hopefully a lesson that historians always say you should learn from history, and we are still very stubborn in that, but that is something, you know, the problems and conflicts you don't address now will come and hit you back later. And it also goes for members of the Dutch parliament, for members of the European Parliament.
Thank you. A short question or something to add here?
Yeah. No, thank you. So my name is Sherwan. I'm a humanitarian worker, working in Syria for the last 10 years. And also I am a master's student in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. My question is mainly for Arya, actually, because I think everyone mentioned the facts of manipulation of humanitarian aid, of humanitarian assistance in what can become called as a demographical engineering. So especially after the earthquake, Syria was considered as one of the neglected humanitarian aid because a lot of aid went to Turkey, Antakya specifically, which is ruling right now Afrin, as it was mentioned. So what kind of needs are there in Afrin right now? As we know, Jindera city was 95% destroyed. What are the needs there? What are you doing there? You said like you are having people on the ground trying to provide humanitarian assistance to those people, and how international organization can provide aid to the vulnerable people in Afrin, whether Kurds or Arabs, settlers or non-settlers, originals or whatever you want to call them, without as much as possible stucking in a political manipulation. Thank you.
So regarding the needs, you know that question happens every time that Kurds have a crisis. And believe me, this happens a lot, too many times. And every time this question happens, every time I answer the same, we need everything because no one is actually helping us. We literally need from tents to food, to hygienic product, to medicines. People are using their car as a fridge now. I mean, a few weeks ago still, they were using their car as a fridge because if the house collapsed, they know they're not going to get food. So they have to use something as a fridge, it will be the car. It's to make you understand how the needs are very low. I mean, we do not reach their needs at all. For example, the tents, they were built with carpets. And if you know a little bit the region and so on, they are very thin plastic carpets while the temperature outside is -0. So that's the situation there, and how we are able to help. We are not able to send anything there. The only Kurdish organization, Barzani Charity Foundation, is the only one that is able to actually send things through Turkey. That's the only one. There is political, of course, the humanitarian is strongly linked to political ties. This is something that is obviously linked. We can mention, we had a lot of restriction on Syria to send humanitarian help. And you know why it is? Why Syria had so many restrictions? Because we had some very known Islamist, Salafist organization in France, for example. I will take the example in France because I know them, such as Baraka City, where it comes from, that was targeting across the whole France, Muslims from radicals to also they managed to get support from the moderate, like the moderate Muslims. They're like, yeah, give it to Syria, don't worry, we'll help them. After 2-3 years, what happened is they were helping one family, they were helping one jihadist. That was like this. They got closed down. The guy went to, of course, he was expelled from France. He went to Turkey, and the organization is still active. And in Turkey now, but that's another subject. That's also proved the fact that it is against linked together. And the other point was
like how international organization can prevent
stucking
in this manipulation.
It cannot. Unfortunately, when BCF goes into Afrin, they have to go through the headquarters of the militias there. And in the meantime that they are actually in the headquarters, you can see populations that are robbing, literally stealing the aids from the trucks. You have, in the first arrival of delivery aids from the UN were 14 trucks. None of them reached the Kurds. So there is no, I don't have any hope for international help. So I think the help in Kurds, and this is really interesting because this is something that the Kurds are pushing across the whole world, that we're actually making the things decentralized, because once we make centralized help, that's where we get targeted, that's where we get manipulated, that's where we get So we have to work more into decentralized, unfortunately. It is less efficient, but that's the only way. I do not trust, and I won't trust any organization that is helping on the ground, because they have to be under the control of the militias. And there are not only me, there are also other activists, Afrini activists. This is some kind of clandestine humanitarian action. It's just Afrini that you can see around them, around here, that have like pure heart. Their family is suffering on the ground. They're like, I just want to help. That's it. I have no ties with politics, and that's it. And we're working with those peoples. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have to wrap up. We're absolutely not done talking, but that's why we have a third round at the bar for everyone here, so we can discuss more. I want to thank all our guests, our speakers, for their great insight. Thank you very much for being here and talking us through this topic. I also want to thank Stichting Hebboen for organizing this with the Balie. Thank you very much, Khalid, Barkat, Peshmerga, Morat, Alina Jabari, Amjad Al-Karaf, and Sipan Salim. Thanks a lot. And go to helpafrin.nl if you want to help with donations, even if it's something very small. It's more than welcome. I want to thank you, our dear audience, for listening, and also for watching from home. We have some music now, which might give us some hope. So I'm closing off for the viewers at home, and I hope to see you another time. We're going to listen to Sipan Mirkan and Karvan Hamid Kalak. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.